say, Amen. Everybody say, Amen. Everybody say, Amen. Amen. Let the church say, Amen. Let the church say, Amen. Let the church say, Amen. Amen. Let the preacher say, Amen. Let the preacher say.
I have to say that of the 3 places that I went this weekend, I had the best time at St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church, and that had a lot to do with the energy of the congregation. I felt incredibly welcome from the moment I was greeted by the gloved usher at the front door, who handed me a fan, which is a great Southern tradition, by the way, and a bulletin, and sat down, and I was with a friend because I told her about the project and she wanted to come as well. And we sat kind of towards the back and on the side, but it's a really popular church, so we didn't really stay isolated for very long, only maybe 2 minutes. And I ended up making really good friends with the gentleman sitting next to me, and he made it such a special experience because so much of the AME tradition goes back to call and response, which is an African tradition. It's African in origin, where a leader, in this case usually the preacher, and there are 5 preachers, by the way, at St. Paul, which brings an amazing amount of perspective to what goes on in a service there. They say something, and then the congregation is supposed to answer back. And there are also portions where you're supposed to turn to your neighbor, take hands, and look at each other and have a brief conversation. Some of it has to do with the prayers that you've just made, and sometimes you are repeating what the preacher is telling you to repeat. You say, neighbor, it's on layaway, which I actually really liked the idea of prayers being on layaway. But he made it incredibly human to me, because I know that we do have interaction within the Catholic Church, mostly in the offering of peace. But I know that my experience with it has been, if you're with a stranger, you kind of avoid eye contact and do the cold fish handshake. But in this case, it was very intimate. It was full on, maintain eye contact, smile into the face of the person next to you, and really mean it when you hold their hand. So that was really beautiful. Some things that struck me about the church was, number one, the age of the congregation. There were very few young people. There were a couple of families, but overall it was older people. And there was diversity within the church. I mean, African Methodist Episcopal is predominantly going to be black. And that was true, but I was by no means the only white person there. I was by no means the only non-black there. And that aspect of who we were was just kind of ignored, because I think when you walk through that door, you become brother or sister, which is really a beautiful way to look at the world. And the music, I have to talk about the music. The music was awesome. I'm a musician, so that's like huge for me. When the music is good, I'm really into the service, and I was really into the service, and it was like high energy the whole 2 hours I was there. I mean, I'm used to Mass being over in an hour. It was a 2-hour service, and it didn't feel that long at all. And I'm also used to being in a church where there's a right and a wrong way to do things, and that was not the case at St. Paul. If you wanted to riff on it, you riffed on it. There were ladies behind me that were just wailing, and it sounded wonderful. And even if it didn't sound wonderful, it didn't matter, because it was about an expression of spirit. It wasn't about being right. It wasn't about following the rules. So that was a lot of fun. There was a lot of participation, and it was also this huge sense of community. Also very central to much of what they were doing was remembrance. This sense of who you are, where you come from, and how what you're doing today fits in with the traditions of your ancestors. There was a lot of conversation about the hymns being sung, how they weren't using modern hymns, they were using old old hymns that had their roots in slavery, to be really frank. And there was a tremendous sense of history in that church, which was gorgeous to be part of. I obviously felt different because I was white when I walked in, but over the course of the service, that really faded away, and I felt very accepted in the community. And they're an incredibly accepting community. I mean, while we were there, someone spontaneously joined the church, which was awesome to see that happen, and to see the complete sense of embracing that new person that they didn't know before Sunday. So it was a really wonderful experience. I very much hope to go back, and it was really a pleasure to get to have that experience. It was just so joyful and so inclusive. So for the last part of my othering experience, I attended Spanish Mass at my home church of Sacred Heart Cathedral in Raleigh. I went in expecting that it was going to be pretty much like what I'm used to, but in Spanish. It was not. It was like going to a completely different church. Number one, the attendance was phenomenal. It was standing room only. It also was very noisy, and I noticed that as soon as I walked in, because I'm used to walking in and it being quiet, and you kind of get nasty looks from the lady in the front row if you like whisper too loud. But it was very noisy, and it stayed noisy the whole time, which, knowing what I know about Hispanic culture, makes sense, and it's like perfectly acceptable. I sat what I realized later was a large family group, and I was the only one not in the large family group. But I mean, nobody asked me to move. I think it was very obvious that I didn't know what was going on. The girls on either side of me, when it came time to offer peace, offered me peace in English. I think they realized pretty much off the bat that I didn't speak Spanish. Overall, it was a very discombobulating experience, because I had no idea what was going on. I would try to follow along because, I mean, the Mass is the same no matter where you go. And I couldn't do it. There were big swaths of time that I was just lost. Which is fine. I mean, that was kind of the purpose. I felt like when I walked in the door, and it was a language thing. It wasn't anything to do with how I looked. It was everything to do with the fact that I couldn't communicate, which was very different. Because even abroad, I was used to people speaking English and knowing how to speak English. And I know that the girls next to me spoke English, but there were people there that didn't. And I also didn't like trying to ask people to speak English when, I came to the Spanish Mass for the purpose of not being able to speak the language. So it was a very interesting experience. Just like at the mosque, there were a whole lot of kids. I was amazed at the number of young people there, because even at the Mass that I'm used to going to, the congregation tends to be a little bit older. There are families, but you don't see many people in their 20s, my age. And there were lots of teenagers and young people there by themselves or there with their families. And it was very much a family event. I think that's probably why people talked the whole time. Which was fine. Also, the music was completely different. I'm used to a very, stately service. They had a great guitarist who sang Spanish music, and it's a Spanish Mass, so all of the Mass parts have a Spanish quality to them. Spanish, I don't want to call it a flair, but it's written in a Spanish style. So that was very different. Overall, I just felt kind of overwhelmed by the differentness of it and how different I felt in this very familiar setting. I mean, I sit there at least once a week, if not more, from different obligations. So it was very interesting to find that the experience I expected to be the least different was actually the most different.